Hello and welcome to the CBV podcast.
Hello and welcome. I hope you're having a great day today. We have 8 topics to cover, including our first look at the Uncharted movie, Jared Leto returning as a Joker, as well as much more. And at the end, we also have my review for BORAT 2. Now, if you'd like to skip to a topic that interests you most, then you will find the relevant time codes provided in the description below. But for now, let's start with our first topic of the day. And that is, we have our first look at the Uncharted movie. If you didn't know, Nolan North, who is the original voice actor for Nathan Drake in the Uncharted video games, he's tweeted out a bunch of photos of our first look at Uncharted. These photos are also tweeted on my Twitter account, which is at CloudBoyVids. That is also linked in the description below if you'd like to check those out. So yeah, let's just talk about what he's tweeted. So first of all, the big thing, he's tweeted our first look at Tom Holland as Nathan Drake in the Uncharted movie. Immediately, you can see that the Nathan Drake costume is very faithful to the look of the costume in the video game. He's got his Henley shirt. He's got the ring around his neck as a necklace, which is very iconic to the look of Drake. He's got his boots. But the new thing that I think we haven't quite seen before, not that it's a big deal, but I did take a second look and I thought, he's wearing like cargo trousers. I don't think we've seen Nathan Drake actually wear cargo trousers, which is something that actually seems more practical than what he does wear. As far as I can think, he's always wearing basically jeans or slim chinos of some sort. Like we've never actually seen him wear trousers that actually have a lot of pockets, which with cargo trousers are actually going to be quite helpful. So I thought that was a nice little difference between the movie costume and the video game costume. But overall, it's pretty much bang on accurate to what we see in the video game. Tom Holland doesn't look as young as I imagined he would in the costume, just based off the fact that I know him so well in the Peter Parker role for the MCU movies. So, yeah, he doesn't look quite as young as I imagined. So hopefully his acting will also carry over the maturity of this character compared to, say, his role as Peter Parker, where he's got to play up that he's a kid. Whereas this one, he needs to be a little more on the adult side. So fingers crossed, Tom Holland can also pull off the acting of a more mature role, as well as looking a little bit more adult. This film is a prequel to the video games, so the script is based around a young Drake. So you can't hold it against Tom Holland for being cast, because his age actually has everything to do with this movie. It's a prequel. It's based on a young Nathan Drake, so I can't really criticize on the fact that he doesn't look like the Nathan Drake necessarily from the video game, because he is a younger version. And I think that's good, actually. You know what? The games are so iconic, it's almost risky to even try and sort of reboot those stories or try and add something that might complicate the timeline. So it kind of makes sense that they would make a prequel to kind of show Nathan Drake's origin. So I'm fine with that. But if this was just a straight up reboot or reimagining of Uncharted, then I would have been worried that they cast a young actor. But with context of what they're going with in the story, it makes sense that they cast a young actor. And Sony have a good relationship with Tom Holland because of his role as Spider-Man. But yeah, I'm very open after seeing this image to seeing what Tom Holland can bring to the role. He's got the look down. I'm fine with that, because if you've played the Uncharted video games, and you will know that you can play flashbacks to when he was younger. And Tom Holland actually kind of has a nice blend of the young Nathan Drake we've seen in the video games and the older present-day Nathan Drake. So I think they've actually, look-wise, I think they've actually managed to capture the sort of in-between years of what we've seen in the video games. We haven't actually seen Nathan Drake in the games at this particular age. So it is quite an interesting approach to the movie, and one that does fit within the timelines. It's the years that we haven't necessarily seen. So yeah, I think the look of this is very promising, and I'm very happy with the costume is pretty accurate. Nolan North, who again is the voice of Nathan Drake in the games, he tweeted this photo along with two official set photos of an old book and an ancient artifact. These photos are also really reassuring because it shows that the team making this film have really managed to capture the visual aesthetic of the video game. Like, if I didn't know that all these set photos were from the movie, I may have actually assumed that they were screenshots of a cinematic from a new Uncharted game. Like, they really have captured the visual aesthetic of the games very well, so that's really reassuring. Overall, I'm really optimistic with the first look of the film, which is great news because after seeing the Uncharted short film starring Nathan Fillion, which is on YouTube, all I wanted was that short film to be made into a full feature with Nathan Fillion in the role, because he was so good. Like, the way he said his lines and delivered all those lines of dialogue and the way he acted, he really did capture the mannerisms of Nathan Drake, probably better than any actor ever will. But having enough time to process that we are getting a prequel to the games with a young actor in the role, and just seeing these official photos, I have finally started to feel some excitement again to see this team bring this game to life on the movie level. So, you know, I think I've just had enough time to process that Tom Holland was in the role, because initially I didn't really feel excited because he didn't really seem to be he didn't really seem like someone who would be able to pull off a Nathan Drake type of personality, and I'm still that's the only real hesitant thing I have. If he can't bring that Nathan Drake humor and wittiness that kind of just about allows the character to get through these tight situations, then that will be the massive thing that's missing. He really needs to capture the personality of Nathan Drake. He has the look down as far as a young Nathan Drake goes, but if he doesn't have that personality, that's really going to be missing. And I think that's really what makes me love that character so much, is his smart-ass sense of humor. So I really hope as well with the script, I hope the script is also providing these kind of lines for Tom Holland to deliver. So I hope they're all studying the games very closely as far as the mannerisms and how Nathan Drake actually talks and gets out of these awkward situations. But overall, at the minute, I'm feeling much better about how they're handling this film. I've always thought if any film deserves to, if any game actually deserves to be adapted into a film, it's the Uncharted franchise, because I feel like they're just inherently cinematic. When you play through all of those action sequences in the games, the level of action is like a blockbuster. So I really hope they don't let us down and bring us action sequences that aren't as massive as the ones that we've seen in the games, because it just feels very strange for a video game to have a bigger blockbuster level action compared to the film adaptation. But I mean, let's be honest, as promising and reassuring as these photos are, we have learned before that just because a film captures the look of a game, that doesn't always mean that a game translates well to film. Video game movies have struggled for years to become big hits, and we're only recently starting to see a few decent adaptations appear. And the best example of a film that is faithful to the look but wasn't an entertaining enough film, in my opinion, at least in recent years goes, is the Assassin's Creed movie. That film had so much potential with the cast it had, the director and the costume and the set designs. Like, it just captured the game very well, but the script just didn't work at all. And it's one of those games where, to be honest, I've played a lot of the games. I've played up to Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and my problem, as soon as I sat down to watch Assassin's Creed, I realized like this will visually be very faithful to the game. But I realized that I didn't really understand the story of Assassin's Creed. That's because I'm playing a game. I don't really feel like I need to know the ins and outs as much. I just want to kill and assassinate people. So when I sat down for the film, like, oh god, the script could be really complicated, just because they're trying to capture the point of this franchise in one movie, and that might go a bit sideways. And I did find myself getting confused and then kind of understanding and then getting confused again. So, you know, games aren't always great to adapt into films because they, I mean, you can play a game for like, I don't know, like 15 hours, and then if you're you're playing the game, so really, as long as the game is fun to play, you don't really mind if you don't understand the story quite well, but it helps if the story is great. Like games like Uncharted and The Last of Us, they are very cinematic games, like in the sense that they feel like you're playing a movie, and that's why I feel like Uncharted could be, if it's done right, it could be the best video game adaptation to a film ever, because it feels like you're playing a movie. And that's what I want them to capture, ironically, in the movie adaptation of Uncharted. Yeah, I'm really curious, and I'm very cautious about setting my expectations too high, because Uncharted is one of my favorite video games, and it deserves the most to become a film. But I think a lot of it heavily relies on having a good script, and I hope the script is as good as everything else we're seeing so far. Having said that, my favorite film adaptation of a video game is probably the latest Tomb Raider. It may not be the best film I've ever seen, but it definitely was a fun time at the cinema. And as someone who knows nothing really about Tomb Raider, like I've never played the games, but I know like very little about it, I still really enjoyed watching it. So that gives me confidence that the Uncharted film will at least be as good as the Tomb Raider movie, because it definitely has all the elements that you can take from the game to make into an even better film adaptation, and it just lends itself to being a success based, again, on how cinematic the games are alone. And Tomb Raider and Uncharted are very similar premises. They're both people who are treasure hunters, essentially. It's just one happens to be starring a woman and one happens to be starring a guy. So I think if Tomb Raider can make at least a decent adaptation into a film, then I think Uncharted also has at least that level of success, but hopefully even more, because it's no competition when it comes to the games. Uncharted is way cinematic as a game than Tomb Raider is. Those action sequences are just unforgettable. So this just gives me confidence that the Uncharted film has at least a decent chance of being a good enough adaptation. Maybe not amazing. It could be amazing, but we'll see. Plus, if this movie does become a big hit, then hopefully we'll stop getting Indiana Jones sequels being made, because I don't think we ever needed more than the trilogy. I mean, the fourth one was okay. I mean, I was quite young at the time when the fourth movie came out, so I wasn't really fussy about what I watched, but we don't need any more Indiana Jones sequels. The Indiana Jones has been done. Unless they're rebooting it, I think we should just leave it as it is. But they have announced that they're making another one with Harrison Ford, so I need something to replace that, and I think Uncharted is the way to go. It is a modern day Indiana Jones movie, and if it does well, that'll be good enough for me. We can just keep watching Uncharted movies, and that's why they probably cast Tom Holland, is because they want a franchise. They want him to grow up with the franchise, so eventually we get him to the point where he is age appropriate and he is the age of Nathan Drake from the game. So, I can see why Sony's done this, and I can also understand why people may not be happy with this decision. But as far as the story goes, this does make sense why they've done what they've done. I just hope he captures that personality of Nathan Drake. Overall, so far so good. And also seeing Nolan North, the game's voice actor, also tweet a photo of him and Tom Holland talking on set, praising his performance, is the biggest compliment an actor can receive. And that makes me very excited. He's been able to do a lot of stunt work as Spider-Man, like, doing backflips, and it's that physicality has benefited in the action. So I could see how those skills would be a great addition to the role of Nathan Drake, actually having an actor who can actually do a lot of the stunts himself without purely relying on the stunt team. I mean, Nathan Drake gets into a lot of fights, he injures himself a lot, so, Tom Holland would be able to definitely bring the physicality needed for the role. Obviously, maybe not the backflips. Nathan Drake's never done a backflip, so obviously that wouldn't come in handy, but certainly just the action he brings from Spider-Man can definitely be injected into this movie, into that role. So yeah, that's very promising. Fingers crossed this will be the best game adaptation to film. I'm really hoping. I'm trying to be cautious about my expectations of excitement, but as long as I just need to see him say some lines of dialogue, and then we'll feel reassured. When that trailer comes out and we actually hear what Tom Holland is going to sound like as Nathan Drake, that will set my expectations to a certain level, depending how that comes out. That's all I have to say. Let's move on to topic number 2, and that is Joker is back for the Snyder Cut of Justice League. If you've seen the Justice League Snyder Cut trailer, you may have noticed that in one shot of the trailer, a Joker card floats across the screen, which is heavily teasing the appearance of Jared Leto's Joker. Well, now it's official that Jared Leto's Joker will be returning in the role for scenes that will be added to Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League. And I'll be honest, after the backlash that Jared Leto received for his take on Joker in the Suicide Squad, the fact that he didn't appear for his own character's cameos in the Birds of Prey film, and the fact that he was just disappointed with how much his character scenes were cut out of Suicide Squad, I did not think we would ever see him return or even want to return to the role. I actually didn't mind his version of Joker. From what little we saw of him in Suicide Squad, you know, he's not my favorite Joker, but I felt like it was unfair to judge him based on like his very brief appearances in scenes that were clearly overly cut. I mean, I think he was only in the movie for 5 minutes, and you know, you can do so much with that character, so it felt wrong to really judge him on, you know, a few minutes of footage. So I'm open to letting him get another chance to prove what he can really do in this role, providing he is in the Snyder Cut more than he is in the Suicide Squad movie, because then I feel like he'd have more of a chance to prove his acting abilities with a role like this. And also his character really wasn't needed in Suicide Squad at all, and it just had that character just had no impact on that story. So again, it's hard to base his performance, because they gave him nothing to do. They just kind of gave him random scenes. They didn't really lend themselves to the story. I mean, if you took Joker out of it, Harley would still end up on the team like she does. The only difference is, you know, if you didn't have Joker, she wouldn't break out of her cell. But I suppose that would have been the best way to introduce him. Introduce him as a cameo at the end of that film, so everyone can start getting excited. But he just wasn't needed in that story. So I hope that if Snyder is adding the Joker to his cut of Justice League, that's because he feels that the Joker's character actually has a more important role towards the overall story. I mean, this Snyder Cut is becoming more and more interesting, because as far as I'm aware, in the history of films, this is uncharted territory for a film. We've always had theatrical cuts and director's cuts and extended cuts for films, and you know, reshoots on films is really standard. But I can't think of any film that's been extended to the point of being 4 hours long. This new Justice League cut will have doubled its theatrical cut's runtime, to the point where it's being released on HBO as a mini TV series. So Jared Leto isn't playing Joker as part of any reshoots. He's being added for brand new scenes that were never originally intended for the film. Zack Snyder is reconstructing the story and the script to make his ultimate vision for his perfect Justice League movie. And, you know, he's had a lot of years to think about this, and, you know, he's seen Joss Whedon's cut for the theatrical Justice League, and, you know, he's had plenty of opportunities to have a think about what he would have done differently, how he could have improved the movie. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Zack Snyder can do with all these resources available. And it kind of feels like a big moment in film and television history, because nothing like this has really been done before, which is especially with such a big budget on this scale of filmmaking. So, you know, a lot of pressure is on his shoulders. So we'll see what Snyder brings to his Snyder Cut. I have no idea what to expect with all these new scenes being added, but I'm very curious nonetheless. Let's move on to topic number 3, and that is, there seems to be a Mr. Freeze and Flash Easter egg scene on the Batman set. So if you haven't seen, again, I've tweeted this as well on my account, CloudBoyTweets, link in the description below. There is another set photo that someone has managed to capture from the Batman, where they have found a black torn poster that says destroy Goth Corp. And if you weren't aware, Goth Corp is where Victor Freeze worked and has his accident, which leads to his transformation into the Batman villain, Mr. Freeze. And also featuring in the poster, you can see a lightning bolt that appears to be more accurately the logo for the Flash. So it looks like we have 2 Easter eggs in one set photo, but this isn't the confirmation that these characters will appear in the film. It's merely just a fun reference that are being used to further flesh out this Batman universe and allude to who may already be out there walking around in this world. So don't expect them to pop up. I mean, we've seen a lot of Easter eggs in previous set photos alluding to, Superman, Wonder Woman, and other villains such as the Joker. So don't expect these characters to actually appear in the film, because it's just a fun way to flesh out the world by using Easter eggs and references. So I'm curious what the Batman sequels will look like if these references are foreshadowing characters that may appear. Because if this film does become a success, it'll be interesting to see if it changes the tone. I mean, the trailer for the Batman has made it look so grounded and realistic, maybe more so than the Dark Knight trilogy, that we haven't seen any criminals with powers. So I'm struggling to imagine sequels for the Batman that may deal with actual supervillains with superpowers. I just hope that dealing with powers in this universe doesn't affect the tone in any way, because I love the tone they've gone for in the trailer, and it would be just really jarring if in the first film we're dealing with, the Riddler, the Penguin, and Catwoman, all very kind of, very human characters that don't have really any superpowers. And then in the sequel, we're dealing with things like Mr. Freeze and the Joker, and not that the Joker has powers, but he still falls into a vat of acid. And are they going to do the chemical thing, or are they going to do like a Heath Ledger Walking Phoenix thing where he just puts makeup on? Like, it doesn't look like from the trailer of the Batman that characters like that, very out there characters, would blend well into this universe, especially with Riddler. Like, Riddler could have easily just been a guy in a green suit with question marks, but they went even more grounded and realistic with it, and made him this really creepy dude wearing a mask and goggles and a big trench coat. Like, they really took it to a different level that we've never seen before with the Riddler, almost like a Jigsaw meets Seven kind of villain. Like, it's very David Fincher-esque, just the style and the way they're treating these characters. So I am really curious to see if these Easter eggs we're seeing are just Easter eggs, or if they are actually foreshadowing something for sequels. Who knows what they can do with those characters to fit in this version of the Batman universe. But nonetheless, I'm still excited to see the Batman as soon as it's released. And who knows, I mean, this could be a really big success, so I'm very excited to see where it goes. Now, let's move on to our topic number 4, and that is we have the first trailer for News of the World. This is a movie that is a Western drama about a guy who's played by Tom Hanks, who travels from town to town spreading news of the world, which is fascinating because, we take for granted how easily we can access news of the world with our technology today, but back then news had to be delivered by individuals traveling from one community to another. And on Tom Hanks's travels, his character finds a girl all alone after her parents were killed by Native Americans, and as a result he takes her with him in search of a new place for her to call home. And it's just such an interesting approach to a story like this. It looks very heartwarming, especially with a great actor like Tom Hanks in the role. And the trailer shows how the girl he's looking after, she doesn't actually speak English and doesn't particularly like Tom Hanks at first. So they have to overcome their differences and their different communication and learn to bring the best out of each other on this long journey. What excites me as well is it's directed by Paul Greengrass, who also directed Captain Phillips, and that was a brilliant movie. So knowing that he's making this film makes me even more interested to see News of the World. The trailer was great. And I'm very interested to see this film at some point because I love the Western setting and I love Tom Hanks' performance and I enjoyed Captain Phillips a lot. There really isn't anything I didn't like about the trailer. So to me, that's like the best thing to say about the trailer, is that you didn't really have any concerns or worries about it. If you haven't seen it yet and you love Tom Hanks, then definitely check it out. Okay, let's move on to topic number 5, and that is the first trailer has been released for Raya and the Last Dragon. So this is a Disney film. It looks like the plot revolves around someone called Raya, who is searching for, I presume, the Last Dragon in order to bring back balance to her very divided community. I'll be honest, for some reason, I looked at the animation initially, and I couldn't help but think that this was a movie intended for Disney Plus, because it's not that it looked bad, but it didn't quite look up to the Pixar standards of animation that I think they have kept in their other big movies. But by the end of the trailer, I started to change my mind on the animation quality. Maybe it's because the certain scenes maybe aren't finished, but it definitely looks finished to me in the trailer. So my only other logical thought that I felt this way is because the scenes that I thought looked slightly lower in animation quality was when we see a young Raya doing her sort of tomb raiding. But by the end of the trailer, we see her older self, and I thought the animation for that looked much better. So, now I kind of think that Raya just has... a young Raya just has an unusually simplistic design for a Pixar film. So I can't quite put my finger on it. I think it's just that young Raya looks oddly simplistic for the level of animation Pixar can provide. Regardless, this still looks like a very different Pixar film to what I was expecting. I was getting Tomb Raider gaming vibes in the first half of the trailer with, all the booby traps and finding specific artifacts, but by the end, it was sort of looking more Mad Max to see an older Raya traveling across the desert landscape, passing, people who are made of stone. So I'm definitely way more interested to seeing her grown-up self, and I hope most of the movie is actually set with an experienced Raya, but of course, it will still be interesting to see how much she's changed and evolved since her younger days. I also like the unique design of her pet-like companion, who's called Tuk Tuk, which is a very adorable creature she takes around on her missions. The trailer shows that in Raya's younger days, Tuk Tuk is like a small ball-like creature that she uses to assist with things such as booby traps when she's tomb raiding, but by the end of the trailer, it's clear that this creature really can grow a lot, as when we see an older Raya, she's riding a much, much larger tuk-tuk as a form of transportation. So that just makes me very curious as well what the sort of world building is like. The trailer may not have sold me yet on wanting to see this, but I am definitely interested in this Raya character and how different the premise looks from other Pixar films that have been made. So, it doesn't look bad. I might need another trailer to sell me on how good this movie really is going to be. That's all my thoughts on Raya and the Last Dragon. Let's move on to topic number 6, and that is, we have new release dates. So Ghostbusters Afterlife has been delayed to June 11th, 2021. So that's very sad news for people who are looking forward to that. However, Don't Breathe 2 has its first official release date, which is August 13th, 2021. So fingers crossed, let's hope it stays there. And but you never know with these release dates, especially with the pandemic going on. And finally, we have Candyman. The sequel to Candyman has been delayed to August 27th, 2021. Another sad thing, because it was meant to come out this month of this year. So we've got to wait nearly another year for this movie to come out. But, if these films have been delayed, don't think of it as a bad thing, because that clearly shows that the studio has a lot of faith that these films are worthy to have a theatrical release. So they're very confident that it is going to make money when people are able to go back to the cinemas. So I think the fact that they've delayed these films is a good sign that the studio are very happy with the way these films have come out. So So just try to be optimistic if you are disappointed at their delayed release dates. Just try to think optimistically that obviously the studio has a lot of faith that these films will get people's attention and they will be a success. Obviously, take the release dates with a pinch of salt. They could change, they could be delayed further, or they could be released even earlier. We just don't know what's going on, especially these days as everything's constantly changing and becoming unpredictable as the world continues to cope with the pandemic. Let's move on to topic number 7, and that is the Meg 2 has director Ben Wheatley attached. I am personally not familiar with any of Ben Wheatley's work. As far as I can tell, the only things I have seen that he has directed are the first 2 episodes of Doctor Who Series 8, called Deep Breathe and Into the Dalek. So knowing that he's done some directing on Doctor Who at least tells me that he has some experience with an out there concept. So after knowing that he has directed scenes about an alien who time travels in a phone box, I think he'll be able to direct a movie about a giant shark. I as much as I love The Meg, that was a really fun movie, I don't really think we need to see a sequel to it unless it's not going to be about another megalodon. I'd be more interested if it was about another giant fish, like the giant squid that was killed by the megalodon at the beginning of the first movie. But this movie is based on a series of books, so I'm sure they're using those books to help write up the next story for the sequel. We'll just have to wait and see what they come up with. At the minute, a sequel to The Meg doesn't really excite me because it could very easily fall into just feeling like the same movie again. They're really gonna have to do something different with it to get my attention. But if you're a fan of The Meg as much, like me, maybe you are excited by this news. But for me, I just don't feel like I need to see a sequel. I feel like we got the movie that we needed. The only way I would have improved The Meg is to give it an R rating. So maybe if the sequel was going to be bloody, maybe that would change my mind, because that was the one distracting thing I felt like The Meg was lacking, was violence and blood, because people get eaten, but it wasn't it would be quite gory in real life, and it wasn't really bloody. And actually the way they filmed it, it looked like it was meant to be bloody in some scenes, but they just had to either cut around it or they just didn't add the blood effects because they weren't allowed to make a violent movie. So yeah, if they made it bloody, that would change my mind. I know it's a really stupid thing to change my mind, but I really would have liked to seen The Meg in a much more violent, with a much more violent aesthetic. Anyway, that's all my thoughts for The Meg 2. Let's move on to topic number 8. Scarlett Johansson will be starring in a new movie called Bride. Now, if you haven't heard, Bride is basically a modern-day version of The Bride of Frankenstein, except it's not set in that universe. And what I mean by that is this movie is not part of the Universal monster movie properties, as it's not being made by Universal Pictures, and so the filmmakers do not have the right to call this movie Bride of Frankenstein. Having said that, this film is clearly inspired in taking elements from that story, as the plot for this film, Bride, follows a woman played by Scarlett Johansson who has been created to be an ideal wife for her creator, but when she rejects her creator, she is forced to flee and confront the world that sees her as a monster. So as you can tell from that short synopsis, this is basically Bride of Frankenstein, but without any Frankenstein's monster. I'm very interested to see this story told in a much more modern and realistic way. Having a story about a woman who's created not for another monster, but for her creator, is a really creepy and interesting story that could really dive into some dark places, exploring her thoughts and experiences and perspective of this sick reality that she lives in. And I don't mind that it's not connected to Frankenstein's monster in any way, because I feel like this is a great opportunity for us to focus on how someone might feel in this situation without the Frankenstein's monster taking up any time or taking away the spotlight from the main character, which is the bride. It kind of reminds me of the Invisible Man, the Invisible Man film we got back in February of this year, where it's a modern retelling of a classic monster movie, and I enjoyed the new interpretation for the Invisible Man, so I could definitely see myself enjoying this retelling of the classic Bride of Frankenstein plot. Overall, I really like the sound of this film, so I can't wait to hear more. Okay, now that's all of our topics covered. So let me share my thoughts of Borat 2, aka Borat's subsequent movie film. So before I get into the review, I should probably explain that the night before the film was released, I sat down and watched the first Borat film with my dad in preparation for the sequel. As far as I'm aware, my dad had never watched Borat all the way through. I think he'd probably seen clips, but I'd already seen the film multiple times, but not in a long time. So I'm pretty sure my dad had very little knowledge of what the film actually... He doesn't have a lot of context to what's in the film. He's just seen a few clips here and there, and he knows who the character is. And I've seen the film, but it's been a very long time. So that felt like a really nice opportunity for us to both sit down and it kind of feels like we're watching this film for the first time again. So we sit down the night before and we watch the first Borat film. And my dad is having a great time, and we're both pretty much laughing across the film. So overall, we had a great movie night. And I'm glad that we did this, because I figured, if we both had a great time watching Borat, then my dad is the perfect person to watch Borat's subsequent movie film with. So we sat down the night the film was released. So this is the next day after we've seen Borat, the first Borat film. So the next night, we sit down and we watch Borat 2, which has been released on Amazon. But by the end of our viewing experience for Borat 2, I'm sad to say that we were a little underwhelmed. It did not live up to either of our expectations after watching the first Borat film. Me and my dad, casually, after the film finished, we casually talked about what we thought of Borat 2, and we seem to agree on a lot of things. So I feel like these points I'm about to share with you are pretty valid. Especially if you're debating if this is worth your time, then these points may sway your decision to one side or another. I will say, though, if you are a huge Borat fan, then I'd still tell you to give it a go, because it was nice to see Borat cause more havoc in America. But I will warn you that I don't think you will enjoy it nearly as much as the first film. So I'd say set your expectations low, and hopefully it will pleasantly surprise you, because I think me and my dad just set our expectations a little too high, and it just didn't quite reach the level of the first film. If you like Borat but aren't a huge fan of him overall, then I think you could skip this movie entirely, because most of the enjoyment comes from liking the character and that nostalgia of watching him in another film. So if you're a big fan, I'd still say give it a go. But if you just like Borat but you're not really like that hyped about the sequel, I'd say skip it, because I think you're just going to disappoint yourselves anyway. So the plot of Borat 2 revolves around Borat basically trying to make his daughter, attractive enough to give as a gift to an American politician in order for Kazakhstan to have a good relationship with America. The point of this movie is, to make you laugh, as it is a pure comedy, but unfortunately, me and my dad felt it wasn't as funny as the original film. This film wasn't humorless. There were a few laughs once in a while, but not nearly as much as we had with the first film. And there was one really big laugh that I got out of it, and my dad did as well. But that was more to do with the shock value of the scene, and how cringy the humor was, more than the fact that it was clever. It wasn't really clever, it was just kind of shocking, gross out humor. I just couldn't believe how far they took that joke, and as a result, I just laughed from shock of it. And I won't spoil the joke, but if you've seen the film, you'll know that it's connected to a father and daughter dance. So I won't spoil it other than that. You're just going to have to see it. If that piques your interest, then I'd say go watch it just for that scene alone. Other than that, though, the quality of the humor was definitely lacking, and I have very specific reasons for why I think that is. Firstly, a lot more of the fictional story elements that set up the relationship between Borat and his daughter really overtakes a lot of the film's runtime compared to the fictional story in the first film. Because in the first film, that was it was basically setting up that Borat and his companion were making a documentary about American culture. So we don't really need to know much more about their relationship other than they work together on the documentary. But in this film, Borat spends the movie getting to know his daughter, and so as an audience, we have to get to know his daughter as well. So I felt like too much of the film was spent focusing on building up their fictional family dynamic, and as a result, we got to see less public pranks, which is pretty much the sole reason I enjoyed the first film. It also felt like some jokes were kind of being redone, but in a slightly different way. For example, in the first film, Borat goes to an etiquette course to learn how to be the perfect gentleman when going to someone's home for dinner. But in the sequel, he kind of does the same thing, but instead of learning skills to best behave in a home dining situation, he's learning skills for a group father and daughter ball. So because of the first film, it didn't really feel that original, apart from a shocking joke that I laughed out loud. As I've mentioned before, that happens to be in the same scene, and that joke saved it because of the shock value, but the actual joke itself did feel like reused. Because of, luckily, the shock value punchline, it was the only time amongst a few other occasions where that end joke saved essentially how reused it felt. I mean, with all the other jokes that were scattered across that I felt were reused, it just didn't feel as funny because I'd already seen that in the first film. But with the ballroom joke that I felt had been reused for the etiquette course joke, even though that was reused, it was only because of the shocking ending. I felt like there was a bit of a payoff with that, and there was something different that I was watching. But other than that, there are a few jokes scattered across that do feel reused, and they're just used in a different situation or a slightly different context. The other big issue that this movie does address, at least, is that since the first Borat movie was released 14 years ago, Borat has become a very recognizable character, and so a lot of people will recognize him. And as a result, he's forced to wear a lot of disguises throughout most of the film. And this is kind of a shame because I would have much preferred to see Borat again rather than Borat in the disguise acting as an American. But unfortunately, this isn't really a criticism I can hold against the film, as, you know, it would ruin any pranks attempted in the film if members of the public were aware what was going on just by recognizing Borat. So it did make sense that you're not really going to see Borat in his classic look a lot of the time, because people are just going to clock on very quickly that they're being pranked just by looking at him. Having said that, there were a number of times where me and my dad were just kind of questioning how real certain situations were, as some interactions just seemed very convenient compared to interactions in the first film. And also the disguises Borat wears in order to not be recognized aren't particularly convincing, especially with the facial hair he has and the beards he uses. So me and my dad were questioning on a few occasions how many people are really buying into these disguises. And, you know, I can't guarantee what was definitely a real interaction and what was sort of a more scripted interaction, but I would trust that Sacha Baron Cohen did try to make those interactions as real as he possibly could. He's not an idiot. He knows that the more real the interactions are, the better the joke is. But nonetheless, if me and my dad were questioning certain points of the film, then I feel like the movie didn't quite do as good of a job at selling it as the first movie did. We never in the first movie thought, oh, well, that must be scripted. Oh, well, that's a real interaction. But in the sequel, we just like, are they really reacting like that? Or are they slightly aware that they're in a movie and so they're just going along with it? This film isn't horrible there at all. It's just not nearly as good as the original in my personal opinion. And annoyingly, there are clips of footage in the trailer that don't make it into the final film, and that really annoys me when trailers do that, because it doesn't truly represent the final product, and, you know, that someone's paying to see. I mean, now admittedly, this is a free Amazon original film, so you're not paying any additional costs after you've already subscribed to Amazon, but it still bothers me because I was interested in seeing those moments play out in the film, and was a little tiny bit disappointed that not all the footage in the trailer is in the final film. that is a small criticism that I could use against a lot of films that have trailers that do this, such as Suicide Squad's lack of Joker footage. But I mean, I guess that's a price you pay sometimes when you watch these trailers. I did like the addition of Borat's daughter in the film. She was a very good actress, and she really complimented Borat when pranking people. She didn't feel like she was doing an imitation of Borat. She really did feel like her own character in this story, and she showed that she is able to hold her own and sell her character as a real person without Borat being by her side at all times. So, and also it made sense why she was needed for the film, because it provides more opportunities for the film to prank people in situations that Borat would be too recognizable to do for every prank alone. So, she was there not only for context of the story's reasons for being part of the pranks, but also practically it made sense for her to be another character to help provide more funny moments where Borat wouldn't be able to do because he's just such a famous icon. And I wasn't distracted at all that she was his daughter. The movie does sell their relationship pretty well. It's a shame that exploring their relationship, though, really does take up a lot of the movie's runtime. More so than I was expecting, and I would have loved to have seen them do more public pranks as a duo, but at least the story was different, so I can't complain too much. It's kind of like a pro and con thing. Like, it makes sense why they did it, but the execution wasn't quite right. It just took up a bit too much time for me. I think if I wasn't questioning some of the interactions with certain people, I would have forgiven the movie more for using up more time to flesh out the fictional plot. But because the jokes didn't always land with the public pranks, you just kind of wanted the movie to go back to the pranks and skip the fictional plot, just in the hopes that there are more funny moments with the members of the public. Having said that, I also liked how the beginning of the film tied into the ending of the first film, so it did feel like a natural continuation of Borat's story. And I will say that the ending of the film was not what I expected, and it really is a film that I'm sure you could appreciate being released while there are limited films available during this pandemic. I don't think I have seen this movie again, just because my sister hadn't seen it, but since then, I don't know if I'd watch this again, really. I mean, I'd be more interested to keep watching it again if I'm watching with someone who hasn't seen it before at all, and just kind of react to what their thoughts and reactions are to the film. So in that sense, it could have rewatchability. Like, you could watch it with someone who's having a whale of a time, and that might make the experience better. But if you're watching with someone who's not really enjoying it as much, it does kind of drag a little bit, because it's hard to find it funny when the person sitting next to you isn't enjoying themselves as much as they did with the first film. So it really just depends who you're watching it with. Having said that, it still wouldn't change my opinion just because I had someone else was having a good time. If I watched it with them, it just didn't quite work for me personally. Overall, it's nice and convenient that it's available on Amazon without any additional cost. So I don't regret seeing it. Just because it didn't live up to my expectations doesn't mean I regret seeing it. I applaud Sacha Baron Cohen for at least doing something different with the Borat sequel, but I think this is definitely the last time we will see Borat as far as a movie goes, just because he's becoming too famous now by this point. However, I could see his daughter, who is a much less recognizable character, become more of the focus if they ever did want to make a third installment to the Borat franchise. She really is a great character actor in the film, so I could kind of see a world where they made a third Borat film, but it was based more around his daughter going out in public, and maybe Borat stuck more of the fictional plot and didn't get involved as much. So I could definitely see a world where they could keep going, at least with the family storyline. Like I said earlier, if you love Borat, I'd say give it a go and see if you feel differently, because comedy is very subjective. So just because I didn't laugh as much as I hoped I would, doesn't mean you couldn't enjoy it even more than I did. Regardless of how good or bad you think this film is, you know, you're always going to have the original film, which is undeniably something really special. Borat's subsequent movie film is by no means a bad film. It is just as shocking and ridiculous at times as the first film. And it's a film that you can definitely find moments of enjoyment in, but if you are missing the experience of seeing a film in the cinema, then you should definitely at least check out Borat 2 on Amazon. I'm glad I watched it. I did find some entertainment value in it. It's just that maybe I shouldn't have seen it straight after Borat 1, because that film was just so good. So watching this film after might have set my expectations a bit too high. But still, check it out. If you're a big fan of Borat, I'd still say check it out. Just don't set your expectations too high at all. And if you set your expectations low, you might be pleasantly surprised. Thanks for listening to my thoughts on these movie news and my Borat 2 review. Like and share to support the channel. Subscribe if you haven't already to keep up to date with all my movie talk. And if you would like to support the channel even more, then please check out a link in the description below to The Undecided's latest single called Take It Off, available on iTunes as well as many other digital platforms. Until next time, stay safe and take care.